My name is Nadja. I'm the student presenter here at the MSU Museum for the Science on a Sphere exhibit. Joining me on the call today is my colleague and co-presenter, Nick Van Acker. If you want to say hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Van Acker. I'm an educator at the museum, and I will be moderating the chat today. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to leave those in the chat, and I'll make sure that Nadja gets them answered for you.
Alrighty, thank you. Okay, so today's show is called Animals on the Move. And as the seasons begin to change, the types of animals that you see around you in your backyard or maybe outside will also begin to change. So we're going to take a look at animal migration patterns around the world using the sphere. But before we get into it, I just want to get like a couple logistics out of the way. Throughout the presentation, I'll be asking questions, and to keep it more interactive, and you all can respond using the chat function. Questions are always welcome, and you can either put that in the chat or in the Q&A function. And then one more thing, just a little bit about SOS, if there are any new folks joining us today. Science on a Sphere is a program created by NOAA where we can model all sorts of big data sets that are projected onto this big gray ball that is just hanging from the ceiling. And there are 4 different projectors surrounding this ball, and they project these big planetary data sets that allow us to investigate all sorts of topics within science and also culture. So it's a very cool program. But officially getting into Animals on the Move, it was the first day of spring actually this past Saturday. And even before that, in these last couple weeks, if you're joining us from Michigan, you might have noticed the sun shining a lot more, or just the temperatures warming up, and different animals coming out, especially birds. I know I've been hearing them a lot outside my window in the mornings than I have in the last few months. So I have this data set, pulling it up right behind me. And for the first chat box question, a really easy one, what do you think this data set is showing? Oops. I just switched it up on you all for a sec. But this is the data set that we're taking a look at. And yeah, for the people that are responding, Frankie and Carol, you are exactly right. This is bird migration on the sphere. So I'm gonna just whirl it back around to where we can see it. And these red and orange bands are representing the heat. So as the temperatures raise, you can see the birds are settling around in North America, but as the cold, which is up there, that's slowly coming down, you can see the birds are migrating south. So each dot on this sphere represents one species of migrating bird. And when the northern hemisphere gets cooler, they go south, and as the southern hemisphere gets cooler, they go back up north. And you might wonder how we can track this movement. And scientists use something called bird bands to do it. And I have a whole bunch of bird bands here to show you for all different species. They're customized to the species so that the bird can actually wear it. So as you can see, they're really small, like right here. Here's one type of bird band, and it's actually for the Kirtland warbler, which I have a photo of right there. And then all the way on the opposite end, we have a really giant bird band, and that's actually for the trumpeter swan. There. And that's a photo of a trumpeter swan. And each of these rings has information that's unique to the bird. There is a whole bunch of zeros on this band. It's a bit hard to see. But on actual bird bands, scientists can record all sorts of information, like where the bird was captured, or what type of experiment it's a part of. And if a scientist in another part of the world happens to catch this bird, they can just call up that original scientist and tell them, hey, your bird ended up here. And through tracking this type of information, we can find out how far that bird has traveled, where it's gone, and how long it took for them to get there. So a lot of people know that the temperatures, that birds migrate based on temperatures, but there are quite a few other animals that also migrate. So I have another data set that I'm just going to pull up behind me. And some of them look like blobs, but these blobs are supposed to represent loggerhead sea turtles. These turtles were tracked using satellite transmitting tags between 1997 and 2006. So that's quite a bit of time. And like we saw in the bird migration data set, the red represents the warmer waters, and then that blue up at the top represents the colder waters. And you can see that the turtles are moving up and down between Asia and North America based on the temperatures. And even some insects migrate. So moving into our next data set. Here's a sneak peek of the animal right there. But can anyone guess what this is? I'll just wait for a sec. Yep, everyone's saying that it's a monarch butterfly. Exactly. So this data set is tracking monarch butterfly activity between North America and Mexico. Monarchs travel between North America and go all the way down to Mexico around every summer. And they travel a very long distance in order to get there. So newly hatched monarchs are make the journey south. So let's say they started up in Michigan, for example. There is this special generation of bird called, monarch called a super generation, which is bred to be stronger and way more hardy than previous generations. They make that flight all the way down to Mexico over winter. They just relax there, breed again, and then a new generation of monarchs will fly up northwards. But what's different about these monarchs is that they are not part of that super generation. So they will fly up northward only a little bit, and they'll stop at around Texas. They'll breed again, create a new generation of monarchs, and they'll keep doing that until they reach back to where they originated from. And so it takes 3 or 4 generations until a new super generation is born to make that migration all the way down to Mexico. So for our next question, I want to ask you all, how far do you think it is that these monarchs are traveling between North America and Mexico? And to make it a little bit easier, I'll give you a couple of choices. So do you think they're flying 300 miles, 3,000 miles, or 300,000 miles? Yeah, most people are right on the money for this one. So they are traveling around 3,000 miles in order to fly between North America and Mexico, which is amazing for a butterfly, you know, that looks like this, a very, very small insect. And it's definitely a family effort because it takes a couple generations in order to make one complete migration cycle. And one cool thing about this data set behind me is that it was created from this website called iNaturalist, where anyone can record their observations and upload it to this website where scientists can access the data and create data sets like this one to show us how animals are moving around the world. So some animals are easy to understand in terms of their migration paths, like we saw with the butterflies, birds, and turtles, but other animals are a lot harder to track. And two such examples of that are the northern elephant seal and the sooty shearwater, which you can sort of see here. The green represents where the sooty shearwaters are flying. They're birds that fly really long distances, I believe around 46,000 miles in a year. And then up north, that pink right there is where the northern elephant seals are located at. And so how do we track these animals? So just like in the turtles, the scientists put these sort of backpack tags onto the elephant seals, but they're structured a little bit differently. So these tags allow scientists to track how far the seal has gone, water depth, how far down that they've gone, and also temperature and lots of more information. And that makes sense because elephant seals can dive down to around 4,650 feet below the Earth's surface. And so collecting all this information allows scientists to have a better picture to figure out why these animals are migrating to where they're migrating. So some animals travel huge distances across the Earth's oceans and skies, but some animals stay in the same place. But that doesn't mean they stand in one spot. So I want to ask you all another question, and that is, why might animals need to move around its environment? And there is no one right answer to this. There are lots of reasons why animals would need to move around. So I'll just wait for a moment for answers to come in. Exactly, Frankie says seeking food, water, and mates. Carol says food source, climate, food. Yeah, all of those things are right. They protect their territory, they need to search for food, they need to find mates to reproduce, all that. So we've already talked a little bit about the ways that scientists track animal movements. There are bird banding, citizen scientists, and those trackers. But there are other ways to track animals too. And so we'll look at some of these ways using images from our friends at Potter Park Zoo. So behind me are photos of the lions at the Potter Park Zoo. And if we're tracking an animal in a very small area or in a defined territory, one option is using a radio collar. It is similar to what you would put on a dog or a cat, but it's much more well-built, like robust and secure, because we're putting it on a wild animal after all. And this collar has a transmitter within it that sends signals to scientists that allow them to track where that animal is going within that small area. And then from there, we can map those movements. And so lions are one example of a big animal that can be tracked this way, and we use it for other big animals too. But not all animals are created the same or behave the same. And so some animals are a lot harder to get to than others. So what do we do about those animals? And behind me are photos of snow leopards, which are a little bit hard to see. I think Nick will be putting the photos in the chat so you can see them from home as well. Snow leopards specifically live in very inaccessible places and are hard to find. On top of that, they are also endangered. So it's very important to be able to figure out how they're doing, like how many there are and where they're at. So once a snow leopard is found, it could be radio collared, but there are other methods. And one of them is by setting up trail cams. And they're basically just cameras that you put up wherever there's a trail that a snow leopard typically would travel on. And then when snow leopards are traveling on that trail, it'll trigger the camera and then scientists can gather data from those cameras. Another way is just by looking for signs in the environment. So we could look for snow leopard tracks and even their poop, which we call scat. Scat contains DNA. And in some cases, scientists can narrow down exactly what species they're looking at just by analyzing their poop. But some animals are way too small to be tracked by radio collar. Those animals can be captured, counted, and then released through small mammal traps. And I actually have an example of one right here that was owned by the MSU Museum when they were doing a project or research on small mammals. And one important question to ask, though, after all of these different ways we use to track animals, why is it necessary to track them? I already kind of mentioned it with the snow leopard case, but black rhinos are an even better example to illustrate why it's so important to track them. Black rhinos are critically endangered, and they have their numbers have been severely reduced because of poaching and also habitat loss. So in order to protect these animals, we need to know how many they are, where they are, and how they're doing, what their habitats are like. Whether we're tracking animals across the globe or just in one small area, learning how and why animals move gives us a better understanding of life here on Earth. As the weather begins to change again this spring, take a look at all the life that moves through your backyard and plant those bee-friendly and butterfly-friendly gardens, and understand that all these animals might be on a much bigger journey than you realize. Thank you so much for joining me today for today's Animal on the Move program. We're going to keep this call open for a little bit for any questions or if you want to see other data sets on the sphere. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and Naja, we do have one question or one comment from Frankie, which I think is interesting. So Frankie said that they assume that anything can trigger the camera when they're talking about the camera tracks or the trail cams, not just the leopard. And that's interesting. That's exactly a correct observation, that any moving objects that moves past a trail camera can trigger it. But if you guys are interested in helping scientists track animals, there's actually some great websites you can go to where they use citizens, people who are excited about science, to go through and sort through all those photos. So if the project is looking specifically for snow leopards, you physically go through as a human and click on all the photos that have snow leopards versus other stuff. So I can try and find one of those and put it in the chat. But it's a really fun thing if you're just, sitting bored during your lunch hour looking for something to do. You can look at pictures of trail cams of animals and help scientists track animals. So I'll look for that to put in the chat if anyone's interested in that. But
very
yeah.
cool. Thank you for touching that. Yeah.
And if anyone has any other questions, you can feel free to ask those in the chat.
Frankie says that sounds more interesting than looking through my photos. Yeah.
So I just put one in the chat. This is just one example of it. This is e-mammal from the Smithsonian, and you can see all sorts of different projects where people are trying to track different animals. It's a nice picture, a camera trap of a panda on their homepage. It has all sorts of information about how to participate in the project. But you can also just Google citizen science projects, and there's usually a whole bunch of these photo projects in there.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to end this webinar today. Definitely join us for future Science on a Sphere shows. And yeah, thank you.